Hello, Ling 441. We're back, or at least I'm back, to talk more about the TOBI system of intonation transcription. So I'll just walk you through the overall outline. It's going to be a relatively short lecture. Basically, the idea is to introduce you to this one new element of the system, or at least a couple new elements, and then we'll work on some more practice transcription exercises together. Again, I'm recording this ahead of time, but I'll probably repeat it during the semester, and then we can work on the exercises as a group through Zoom. So for that reason, I have these questions about either the DSP assignment or the course project, and I'm not going to talk about those now, but if you have questions, please send them to me or let me know in some fashion. And instead, today what we're going to talk about is, again, a couple of different elements of the system. One is the possibility that there might be more than one pitch accent within a phrase in English intonation. And the second part of that, which is related, is that you might get what is called downstepping. And I'll explain what that means here in a second. So after we talk about that, we'll work on some new TOBI exercise files. And I've got a link set up on the course webpage. That's the weather. You don't need to know that. From the course webpage, go through labs, and TOBI lab number 2 is right here, and we'll work on this together. And as was the case last time, I want you to come up with your transcriptions for these 5 sound files and then send them to me before we start the next class, so we can talk about those as a group as well. Okay, so let's start off with a little bit of review for TOBI. So English has pitch accents, which align with stressed syllables and an utterance. And so far we've seen 2 pitch accents. One is called the high star, which ideally should align with a peak in F0 on the stressed syllable. And then kind of the flip side of that is a low star, which ideally should show you a trough in F0, or a kind of a bottoming out of the F0 contour in the stressed syllable itself. In both cases, the pitch accents line up with that stressed syllable and make it sound more prominent even than a regular stressed syllable. So they kind of make it stand out for that reason. Also, English has boundary tones, which align with the ends of intonational phrases. So these are not going to line up with specific stressed syllables or words or anything like that. They're just part of the utterance is divided up into what's called an intonational phrase, and at the very end of that, you get these things called boundary tones. And just as was the case with pitch accents, which had high and low variants, for boundary tones, we have high and low as well. There's an H percent sign and a low percent sign. The percent sign just means it's the end of an intonational phrase. It's a boundary tone, in other words. And again, this reiterates the point that these are not associated with a particular syllable. They're just associated with the end of the phrase, which generally speaking is it's always supposed to come at the end of a word. Okay, so like I said, intonation will organize utterances into phrases. They're kind of subdivisions of the entire utterance. Sometimes we refer to those as chunks, not as windows in this case. So you can set that aside for the moment. But chunks are phrases. Boundary tones mark the end of intonational phrases, which are the largest phrases in an utterance. We'll see there's even a further subdivision of that. We'll see that next time. In the transcription of intonation, phrase boundaries are marked with break indices. That's kind of where we get half of the name for TOBI. It's the BI part of it. And the break indices we've seen so far are denoted by numbers. So 1 is a break between words, and 4 is a break between intonational phrases. So you are not necessarily going to hear any sort of a break between words, at least not phonetically or acoustically speaking, when you're transcribing these break indices from a sample of speech. If you know that that's where a word boundary is, you put it there. You should hear a break between intonational phrases, though. It should be kind of the most complete break that you get, or a sense of disjuncture, as they say in the TOBI system. And when you get that, you transcribe that with a 4. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of like when you come up to like a period, as it were, in a written version of a sentence. Not exactly, but it's okay to think about it that way. So here is the example we walked through last time.
Manny came with Anna. Manny came with Anna.
And we kind of highlighted or focused on 2 elements of the tone tier when transcribing this. So there's a low star on the stressed syllable in Manny, which should make that syllable kind of jump out at you. The whole word Manny should jump out at you, in fact.
Manny came with Anna.
And then after that, it rises up to this H boundary tone at the end. So it's pretty easy to see this in the pitch contour in this particular example. most of these are not going to be quite that simple, so hopefully you get this one without too much difficulty. And then we have these word boundaries transcribed here down at the bottom. I have this transcribed in IPA here for the phonetic segmentation of the entire utterance. Most of the time, we're not actually going to use the IPA. We can just use regular orthography, but you can do that if you want. Yeah, and then there's a 4 at the end, which lines up with the high boundary tone. Those two always have to go together. Don't ever use one without the other, please. Okay, as I mentioned in that particular utterance on the previous slide, Manny's supposed to kind of jump out at you. There's a reason for that. That's kind of supposed to be the new information, or we interpret that as the new information that's being added to the discourse, right? So we looked at this last time. There's 4 different patterns for the same string of words, and they would apply to one of 4 different contexts. So this is...
Manny came with Anna.
Like, who came to the party with Anna?
Manny came with Anna.
Gotcha. Not Bob. Or, who did Manny come with to the party? Who came with Manny to the party? I messed that up.
Manny came with Anna.
Got the answer right, though, right? So, Manny came with Anna, not with Jill or with Bob. So, we can also phrase this as an echo question.
Manny came with Anna?
If you're not sure that you heard this right.
Manny came with Anna. Manny came with Anna?
Right, so that kind of focuses on this particular item to make sure that you're getting that right. And there's kind of this general pattern.
Manny came with Anna? With
questions of this form where there's a low star somewhere in it, and then it rises up to the end in terms of its F0. Yeah, so not all questions are going to end like that. That's kind of the stereotypical notion we have of questions, is that they have a rising pitch at the end.
Manny came with Anna?
But that's not always the case. Just because there's a question mark here doesn't mean that F0 is going to rise up to it. So there are other questions which do not. I'll give you an example here. We'll just play these two so you can listen to them before you see what they say.
Did you see Bob? Did you see Bob?
And then?
Where did you go? Where did you go?
Okay, those are both questions. This one is...
Did you see Bob?
And hopefully you can hear that. It goes by a little bit quickly, but this one has a rising intonational contour at the end.
Did you see Bob?
So we've actually got a low star on Bob because that's kind of the element that's being focused here. And then there's a quick rise up to the H boundary tone at the tail end. Something different happens, though, for this question.
Where did you go?
And this is subtle as well.
Where did you go?
But if you listen or focus on that final intonation contour, you will hear that it's very different from what we're getting from...
Did you see Bob?
So that Bob, this is...
Where did you go?
We get instead kind of the opposite pattern, which might be a bit of a surprise. So there's actually an H star on you.
Where did you go?
And then when we look at some examples of these later, you'll see that the F0 drops down to the end of the question. So it's actually going down in this case.
Where did you go?
And it rises up a little bit before it gets to the end. So we're questioning we're focusing in some sense the U here. That's why it's getting accented. But the bigger picture issue here is that this is a WH question. And WH questions in English are basically always going to function this way. They will have an H star followed by a low boundary tone at some point. And it's going to end on a final F0 fall rather than a final F0 rise.
Where did you go?
Which is actually more like what you'd expect for a statement. Okay, so not every question ends in an F0 rise. The upsloping intonation, generally speaking, only applies to yes, no questions for questions, but then there's also this interesting phenomenon which people have been excited about now for about 20, 30 years in phonetics, where people apply what sounds like more of a final rising contour in F0 to statements rather than questions, like yes, no questions, such as did you see Bob? So you can listen to some examples like this.
He's got like a Camaro.
Right, so that's syntactically a statement, but I have a rising F0 at the tail end.
He's got like a Camaro.
That's called uptalk. We heard an example of this before as well from when we're doing pitch tracking.
I would like a flight to Seattle from Albuquerque.
So that one's maybe a bit more realistic rather than me putting on my little Valley Girl voice, but it's the same basic idea. So I say here it's an L star H boundary tone. There's a little bit more going on there, and we'll talk about that in upcoming lectures. But the basic idea is you get a rising terminal F0 contour applied to the end of declarative sentences. That's uptalk. Okay, I'm going to go back to this question briefly.
Did you see Bob?
And point out that I don't say, did you see Bob? I say, did you see Bob?
Did you see Bob?
Where we get some palatalization of this D at the end of the word did. Because there's phonemically, we can presume there's a yod that follows it for you at the beginning of the next word. And then you can write up whatever phonemic or phonological analysis of this that you want. But basically, the D becomes a J or something more like it.
Did you see Bob?
So that segment is changing a little bit in character and quality. So in order to transcribe that in the TOBI system, what you do is you transcribe a 0 word boundary at the end of this one, which kind of means that these two are kind of bleeding into each other. So the others, nothing is sort of changing in terms of overlap or co-articulation there.
Did you see Bob?
But wherever you do get clear co-articulation across a word boundary, you transcribe a 0 rather than a 1. And this applies as well for flaps across word boundaries, as in a phrase or a sequence of words like got it. This T will generally not be actual alveolar stop in Canadian English, like got it, it'll be got it, right? So that qualifies as a 0 boundary as well. Yeah, this happens not all the time, but a fair amount of the time. So make sure you keep this in mind as you're making your transcriptions. Okay, so another thing I need to point out is that there can be more than one pitch accent within an intonational phrase. So here's a nice little example, which I believe you did for the first set of practice exercises. Come on.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Okay.
And the peach colors on the walls.
So this is a sample which actually came from a study I did with Suzanne Curtin a while back. But if you listen to this...
And the peach colors on the walls.
And you say, well, what are the... Well, so first of all, we can answer what is the most prominent word in this utterance, or what is most prominent syllable?
And the peach colors on the walls.
Hopefully that should be an easy question to answer because we have this sort of gigantic rise in F0 for peach.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Pretty sure there's an H star on that. But if there are any other words or syllables in this utterance that sound prominent to you, what would they be?
And the peach colors on the walls. And the peach colors on the walls.
Yeah, so the more you listen to it, the more you might be able to pick this up. The one that's kind of most obvious in terms of its being the second most prominent word in this phrase, I think, is walls.
And the peach colors on the walls.
So she puts a little extra kick into that one as well.
And the peach colors on the walls.
And what might be a little more subtle is that there's actually a low star on colors too. So
and the peach colors on the walls.
You can kind of transcribe it like this. So we get this big bounce for H star, then down here hits the bottom, and then pops up a little bit for walls at the end.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Yeah, so she's not like emphasizing these little function words in here. Each content word gets a little extra oomph. This one goes way high, this one goes down low, and this one goes a little bit higher again. So we can actually get 3 pitch accents within this intonational phrase, which is kind of cool. There's also, because this is a statement, we get this nice low boundary tone at the tail end. I've played this a lot of times, but you can kind of see this as well. The F0 goes way down low, and she's kind of getting into creaky voice here a little bit, which is why the pitch tracker breaks, actually. So we can let's do it one last time.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Yeah, and I think you can hear that at the tail end. Okay, so like I said, this came from a study that I did actually, 10, 11 years ago now. With Suzanne Curtin. It was her idea, and she was the one who got these really cool drawings that some artist friend of hers made. So the idea was that we had mothers reading stories to both children and to adults. And the stories had within them, they're very brief, they had phrases within them that could be interpreted in one of 2 different ways. So the question was whether or not, if you're talking to a baby, do you sort of syntactically disambiguate these phrases better than if you're talking to an adult? So in this particular story, Well, there were two different stories that wound up with the same phrase. In one, a girl moves into a new house and then she gets excited because her bedroom has peach colors on the walls. And then in another story, there's a magician who leaves his home and his magical fruit kind of get up and start to play. And the peach, the anthropomorphic peach, starts coloring on the walls. So we've heard this phrase already.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Many times. But that's the ambiguous phrase that applies to both of these stories. And then the question is, can you tell which one it's supposed to apply to if you just listen to it in isolation? So just to reiterate, this one is peach colors is a noun verb. So the peach is a noun, colors is a verb in that particular case. In here, peach colors is like an adjective noun, right? Peach is an adjective, colors is a noun, and they're both a noun phrase on the walls. So the first, we had people do two tasks in this experiment. It was kind of fun. The first one was, can you tell if somebody's talking to a baby or an adult? I'll let you try to do that with these two examples.
And the peach colors on the walls.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Yeah, so this one is probably not somebody reading to a baby.
And the peach colors on the walls.
So hopefully you got that one right. But then there's a question of, well, when they're speaking to a baby rather than to adult, is it easier to figure out which phrase they're actually saying? So we'll try that with these two. I think these are infant directed over here.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Never mind, I think these are adult directed.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Yeah, so.
And the peach colors on the walls. And the peach colors on the walls.
I'll let you think about that for a second. We'll listen to the other two.
And the peach colors on the walls. And the peach colors on the walls.
Right, so these are the infant directed ones. And I believe, I've kind of lost my notes for this a little bit, but this one is supposed to be the noun verb.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Go peach. And this one is the noun phrase.
And the peach colors on the walls.
And you can hopefully hear that a little bit. There's a little bit of a pause at the end of peach colors.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Same pattern over here. This is the noun verb.
And the peach colors on the walls.
Might be harder to pick that up.
And the peach colors on the walls.
And that's the noun phrase there. So overall, it turned out that adult listeners were able to disambiguate the syntax a little bit better for the infant directed speech, was kind of cool. And it was a bit harder for the adult directed speech. This task was pretty simple, determining whether or not they were talking to an infant or an adult, which is reassuring. Anyways, one of the reasons I'm talking about this, aside from the fun, is that when you do have more than one H star in an intonational phrase, those H star accents will tend to drift downward in F0. And this is a phenomenon known as downdrift or downstepping, which is how I'm normally going to refer to it. So this, in addition to sort of the gaps or the breaks we get in between words or phrases in an utterance, this is providing further evidence that there's phrasal organization because this pattern is supposed to reset when you get into a new phrase. This is also optional, so it doesn't always happen, but when it does happen, what you do is you transcribe the downstepped H star accents with a little exclamation mark right in front of them. So they look like this, and I'll give you a couple examples.
Anna gave Manny a mango.
Hopefully this sounds like a relatively realistic way of saying this utterance, like I'm reading a story or talking about Anna, and maybe they're in the magician's house with a magical fruit.
Anna gave Manny a mango.
And the mango didn't really like it. We don't have to worry about that. What we do have to consider, though, is what's going on with these H stars. So hopefully you can hear that this H star has a higher F0 than the ones that follow it. In fact, they keep going down further and further down in F0 as they reach the end of the phrase.
Anna gave Manny a mango.
Like walking down a set of stairs, a set of F0 stairs. Anyways, here's another example from Mary Beckman.
There's a lovely yellowish old one.
Same sort of idea, same pattern.
There's a lovely yellowish old one.
So after the first one, you transcribe these with an exclamation mark and an H star after it. And I've got an example here of what this looks like.
There's a lovely yellowish old one.
With
There's a lovely yellowish old one.
The F0 track highlighting the H stars in each case. And you can see there's kind of a negatively sloping line going down towards the end of the utterance. This sort of plots out the top of the F0 range. So this one is at 271 hertz approximately. This one is at 238 hertz. This is at 200 hertz, all the way down into a little bit of creaky voice at the end.
There's a lovely yellowish old one.
Yeah. So that's how downstepping works. So like I said, I don't want to overload you at any particular moment in time with this. So we're going to work on focusing on downstepping and multiple pitch accents within a phrase for this particular exercise set. So I'll stop talking there and we'll have at the exercise set and we'll talk about the results as a group too. All right. Have fun.